You begin this story not with kings or battles, but with the quiet sound of wind pressing against wood and earth. It is late winter in a medieval village somewhere in northern Europe. The exact year does not matter as much as the conditions which repeat themselves across centuries. The sun rises late and leaves early. The ground is hard and pale. Smoke rises slowly from low roofs and hangs in the air because the cold makes it heavy. You are not a lord or a monk. You are a peasant whose life is shaped by seasons more than by laws. Winter is the longest test you face each year. Cold is not an abstract discomfort. It is something that enters your bones and refuses to leave. It shapes how you sleep, how you work, and how you think. Your house is small and built close to the ground. It is made of timber packed with clay, straw, and dung. This mixture dries hard and keeps out some wind, but never all of it. There is no glass in the windows if there are windows at all. Instead, there are wooden shutters or stretched cloth. Light is weak and must be rationed. Warmth even more so. The floor is earth. Over time it has absorbed ash, spilled food, and animal waste. In winter it is cold, and sometimes damp. You spread rushes or straw across it, not for decoration, but to keep your feet from freezing. These rushes are changed only when they become too foul to tolerate. During winter they stay longer than you would like. At the center of your home, there is a hearth. This is the heart of survival. Fire is life. It cooks your food, dries your clothes, and keeps you alive through the night. But fire requires fuel, and fuel is never free. Wood must be gathered, cut, and stored long before winter arrives. If autumn was wet or harvest poor, then winter begins with fear. You do not heat your house the way modern people imagine. The fire burns during waking hours and is often banked at night with ash to keep embers alive. Even so, the warmth fades. By midnight, breath becomes visible inside your own home. You sleep close to others not for comfort but necessity. Beds are simple wooden frames filled with straw or dried leaves. Sometimes there is no frame at all, only a pallet on the floor. Blankets are heavy wool if you are lucky. Wool smells and itches, but it traps heat even when damp. Linen is cooler and used sparingly in winter. You sleep wearing most of your clothes. There is no concept of nightwear for peasants. Every layer counts. Tunic, hose, cloak, and sometimes even a hood stay on. Shoes are placed near the fire so they do not freeze solid by morning. Animals are nearby. A cow, a goat, or chickens may be housed under the same roof or in a connected structure. This is not affection but calculation. Animals give off heat and their presence raises the temperature slightly. The smell is strong, but winter teaches you to accept many things. Food during winter is limited and repetitive. You eat bread made from rye or barley. Wheat is rare. The bread is dense and dark. It keeps longer than soft white loaves. You eat pottage, which is a thick stew of grains, peas, onions, and whatever preserved meat you have. Salted pork is precious and used carefully. Hunger and cold are linked. Without enough food, your body cannot produce warmth. This is understood, not in scientific terms, but through experience. Villagers know that a poor harvest means a hard winter, even if the weather itself is mild. You wake before dawn because there is work, even in winter. Tools must be repaired, animals fed, and paths cleared. Some days you go to the forest to gather fallen branches, which is often illegal if the land belongs to a lord, but laws bend when survival is at stake. Many risk punishment to keep their families warm. The cold affects time itself. Tasks take longer. Hands move slowly. Breath must be managed. Frostbite is known though, not named as such. Fingers, toes, and ears suffer first. People wrap rags around them. They rub snow or warm breath into numb skin, not knowing that this sometimes worsens the damage. Illness spreads easily in winter. Coughs linger. Fevers weaken the old and the young. Smoke from the hearth fills the house and irritates lungs. There is no chimney in many homes. Only a hole in the roof. Eyes water. Breathing becomes shallow. Yet winter is also a time of closeness. Stories are told because there is little else to do at night. Elders speak of past winters worse than this one. Memory becomes a tool of endurance. If others survived before, then perhaps you will too. Faith plays a role. Churches are cold stone buildings, but they offer ritual and rhythm. Saints are invoked for protection against illness and hunger. Candles are lit not for warmth, but for hope. The calendar moves slowly towards spring, marked by feast days that break the monotony. You measure winter not by dates but by signs. When the stored grain runs low, when the firewood pile shrinks, when the animals grow thinner, Each of these signs brings quiet calculation. Will it last until planting time? Will everyone make it through? As you lie down at night, the fire dims, shadows stretch across the walls, the cold creeps in again, you pull the blanket tighter and listen to the breathing around you. Sleep comes unevenly interrupted by the need to shift closer to warmth. In this world, winter is not an enemy that arrives once in a lifetime. It is a yearly presence that shapes character and community. Survival depends on preparation, cooperation, and endurance more than strength or wealth. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, one question remains hanging in the dark. How did these villagers plan and adapt long before winter arrived? And what happened when those plans failed? By the time winter fully settles over the village, you already understand that survival does not begin with snow. It begins months earlier, in ways that are easy to overlook when you only think about cold nights and frozen ground. Winter is endured in January and February, but it is decided in summer and autumn, through choices made quietly and repeatedly by ordinary people. You remember the late summer fields. The grain stood tall then, and every stalk mattered. Harvest was not simply work. It was urgency. If rain came too early or too heavily, grain could rot before it was stored. If sickness struck during harvest, there were fewer hands to bring the crops in. Everyone worked, including children and the elderly, because winter would ask for payment later. Once the grain was cut, it had to be dried, threshed, and stored. Storage was never perfect. Rats and insects were constant threats. Moisture could ruin entire bins. Peasants used raised platforms, sealed pots, and woven baskets lined with clay, but losses were expected. Winter planning included accepting that not everything would last. Firewood was another quiet obsession. Wood was gathered whenever possible. Dead branches were prized. Green wood burned poorly and produced more smoke, but sometimes there was no choice. Wood piles were stacked close to homes and covered with thatch or bark. A family judged its chances by the height of that pile. Too small and winter would stretch dangerously long. Clothing was prepared with equal care. Wool garments were inspected and repaired. Holes were patched with scraps. Seams were reinforced. A single cloak might be worn by several people at different times of day. Clothing was not owned casually. It was inherited, reworked, and reused until the fabric could no longer hold together. Shoes were especially important. Leather stiffened in the cold and cracked easily. Many peasants owned only one pair. When soles wore thin, extra layers of leather or even wood were added. Wet feet in winter led to sickness, and sickness led to death. This was understood without debate. Food preservation filled the autumn weeks. Meat was salted or smoked when available. Fish were dried. Vegetables were pickled or buried in pits lined with straw. Cabbages, turnips, and onions stored best. Apples were kept in cool, dry places and eaten slowly. Every preserved item represented warmth in the months ahead. Communal rules governed much of this preparation. Villages shared ovens, forests, and sometimes storage space. These shared resources were regulated tightly. Taking more than your share could mean survival for you, but suffering for others. Yet desperation blurred these rules. Winter exposed both cooperation and conflict. As cold deepened, daily routines shifted. You rose later because daylight was precious and short. Work moved indoors when possible. Spinning, weaving, and mending filled the hours. These tasks were slow and repetitive. They warmed the hands slightly and occupied the mind. Children were kept close. They learned by watching rather than formal teaching. Winter was when knowledge passed quietly between generations. How to judge when a fire was banked correctly. How to recognize spoiled food by smell alone. How to layer clothing to trap air. Cold nights forced new sleeping arrangements. Families slept closer together. Sometimes neighbors shared space if one house was warmer than another. Privacy was sacrificed easily. Survival mattered more. The presence of multiple bodies reduced heat loss and lowered the risk of death during extreme cold. Illness became a constant worry. There were no clear explanations for disease, but patterns were observed. People knew that damp cold made coughs worse. They knew that hunger weakened resistance. Remedies were simple: warm broth, herbs, honey when available. Prayer filled the gaps where knowledge failed. Smoke was both protector and threat. It kept insects away and dried the air but damaged lungs over time. Older villagers often coughed through winter nights. Some could no longer work by spring. Their decline was gradual and accepted as part of life. The village itself changed shape in winter. Paths narrowed as snow piled up. Travel slowed. Visitors were rare. News from outside arrived late or not at all. This isolation deepened the sense that winter was a separate world with its own rules. Markets disappeared. Trade paused. What you had was what you would live on. This created a mindset of careful calculation. Meals were measured. Portions shrank as winter progressed. Festive days offered brief relief, but were followed by restraint. Fear was present, but rarely spoken aloud. You watched the weakest members of the village closely. An old man whose fire went out too often. A child who coughed through the night. Winter made vulnerability visible. Yet there were moments of quiet resilience. A shared loaf. A neighbor bringing extra wood without being asked. A story told again, even though everyone knew the ending. These small acts built a sense of continuity. As the weeks passed, you began to mark time by endurance rather than hope. Each morning survived was a success. Each night endured was an achievement. Spring felt distant and abstract. And still beneath all this effort, there remained uncertainty. What happened when food ran out before the cold ended? What choices were made when survival could not include everyone? These were questions winter forced but never answered easily. By the time winter reaches its deepest point, the village has changed in ways that are difficult to notice day by day, but obvious. When you pause to reflect, the cold has stripped life down to its essentials. What remains is routine discipline and a quiet acceptance of limits. Survival is no longer about preparation, but about endurance and decision-making under pressure. At this stage of winter, the stored food is visibly reduced. Grain bins are lower, meat rations are thinner. The taste of meals becomes plainer, as salt and fat are used sparingly. You feel hunger not as sharp pain, but as a constant dull presence. It shapes your thoughts and slows your movements. People learn to live with this sensation. Hunger becomes part of the background of daily life. Complaining does not help, and so it fades. Children grow quieter, adults speak less. Energy is conserved unconsciously. Laughter still appears, but it is brief and subdued. Firewood becomes the most valuable resource. Each piece is judged before being added to the hearth. Fires are kept smaller and allowed to burn lower. People sit closer together and use their bodies to compensate for reduced heat. Nights are longer now. Sleep comes earlier, not because of comfort, but because there is nothing left to do once darkness falls. When wood runs out entirely, families face difficult choices. Furniture may be broken apart and burned. Tools with wooden handles may be sacrificed. Even parts of the house itself can become fuel. This is not done lightly because rebuilding requires time and materials that are scarce. But warmth tonight can matter more than shelter. Months later, illness reaches its peak during these weeks. Weak bodies struggle to recover. Fevers last longer. Small wounds heal slowly. Without enough nutrition, the body has little reserve. Villagers understand that some winters take lives, and others do not. The difference often seems arbitrary. Care for the sick is simple and constant. Someone must keep the fire going, provide broth, and change bedding. This care is given without expectation of reward. In a village, everyone knows that next time it could be them lying still under heavy blankets, listening to the wind outside. Death, when it comes, is quiet. Frozen ground makes burial difficult. Bodies may be kept for days until the soil can be worked. This delays closure, but also normalizes loss. Children grow up familiar with death, not as spectacle, but as absence. Religion offers structure during this time. Winter feast days punctuate the weeks and provide a sense of progress. Even when food is limited, rituals continue. Candles are lit, songs are sung, and prayers repeated. These acts do not warm the body, but they anchor the mind. As winter slowly loosens its grip, subtle signs appear. Days lengthen almost imperceptibly. The sun rises a little higher. Snow softens at midday. These changes are noticed and discussed quietly. Hope returns cautiously. Planning for spring begins before winter ends. Tools are inspected again. Seed grain is counted and protected fiercely. Eating seed grain is a last resort because it threatens the future. Families debate how much can be spared. These decisions carry weight because they determine whether the next cycle will begin at all. When the thaw finally comes, it brings its own dangers. Melted snow turns paths to mud. Cold water floods low fields. Illness can worsen in damp conditions. Yet the return of movement, sound, and color feels almost overwhelming after months of stillness. Looking back, winter survival in a medieval village is not defined by dramatic moments, but by countless small choices: when to add another log, how thin to slice the bread, whether to share or save. These choices shape not only who survives, but how the community remembers itself. Over generations, this experience builds a culture of caution, resilience, and interdependence. Medieval peasants do not think of themselves as heroic. They think of survival as normal life. Cold, hunger, and effort are expected parts of the world. This quiet endurance leaves little record in chronicles or monuments, yet it forms the foundation on which medieval society rests. Without these ordinary winters survived year after year, there would be no towns, no armies, and no grand events to record. Even today the echoes remain. Modern comforts hide the memory of what warmth costs. But the habits of preparation, cooperation, and respect for seasons trace back to these unheated rooms and long nights. The story of medieval winter survival is ultimately a reminder that history is built not only by those who act loudly, but by those who endure patiently, shaping the future through persistence rather than power. You begin this story standing still in the cold, long after most of the town has gone to sleep. The gate behind you is closed, reinforced with iron bands and heavy beams, yet it feels fragile when the wind presses against it. You are the town gatekeeper, a position that carries little honor but immense responsibility, especially during winter. Unlike peasants in scattered villages, you live in a walled town. The walls promise safety, but they also create dependence. Everything that enters or leaves must pass through a gate, and every gate must be watched. At night, in winter, that duty falls to you. Your shelter is a small room built into the gatehouse. Stone walls surround you on all sides. Stone does not forgive the cold, it absorbs it, and releases it slowly, long after the sun has disappeared. There is a brazier in the room, but fuel is limited. You must make it last through the night. Your work begins before sunset. You inspect the hinges, check the locking bars, and make sure the mechanisms are free of ice. Frozen metal can fail at the worst moment. You test the ropes that control the portcullis if there is one. Every motion is deliberate because mistakes cannot be corrected easily once darkness falls. As daylight fades, merchants hurry to enter before the gate is closed. Winter shortens their margins. Late arrivals plead and argue. Some offer coins, others offer excuses. You follow orders, not feelings. Once the gate is shut, it stays shut unless the town is threatened from within. When the final lock is set, the town grows quieter. Fires dim behind shuttered windows. Footsteps fade, only distant sounds remain. Wind along the walls, a dog barking, occasionally the cough of another watchman further along the wall. Your watch lasts all night. You are not meant to walk continuously. Instead, you listen. Listening becomes a skill refined by necessity. Snow falling sounds different from footsteps. Ice shifting in the moat has its own voice. You learn these differences over years. Cold reshapes time during your watch. Minutes stretch. Your body aches from standing still. When you move, joints protest. You stamp your feet quietly. Loud noise travels far in winter air. Silence matters. You are dressed for the cold, as best as resources allow. A wool cloak thick but worn, layers beneath that have been patched many times. Gloves stiff with age. A hood pulled low. Still the cold finds its way in through gaps you cannot seal. Your breath fogs the air. You turn away from the brazier to conserve heat. Fuel must last until morning. You feed it sparingly, one small piece at a time. Too much now means nothing later. Outside the gate, the road disappears into darkness. In winter, few travelers risk moving at night. Those who do are either desperate or dangerous. You know this. Every sound beyond the walls demands attention. Sometimes someone approaches after closing. A knock echoes hollow against the gate. Voices rise. They claim urgency. A sick child. A broken wagon. Wolves nearby. You are trained to doubt everything. Opening the gate at night risks more than inconvenience. It risks the entire town. When such moments come, you send for a magistrate or captain. Decisions are slow in the cold. While you wait, the person outside grows colder. This weighs on you. You are not cruel, but your role requires distance. Winter magnifies this moral tension. Refusal in summer means delay. Refusal in winter can mean death. Gatekeepers are aware of this and carry it quietly. There are no ceremonies for these choices. Between interruptions you wait. You watch frost form on stone. You count hours by candle length and by the changing feel of the cold. Just before dawn it grows sharpest. This is known to everyone who works nights. Your isolation is near complete. Other watchmen pass occasionally. exchanging few words. Speech feels expensive. Warmth leaves the body when you talk too much. Silence is practical. Food is simple. Bread hardened by cold. A piece of cheese if you have it. Warm drink only if fuel allows. Hunger distracts but cannot be indulged. You think during these hours about the town asleep behind you, about fires burning low in homes, about people who trust that the gate remains closed and watched. They will never know your name, but their safety depends on your wakefulness. Storms are the worst nights. Snow muffles sound and hides movement. Wind rattles everything. Visibility shrinks to almost nothing. You rely on memory of space rather than sight, where the ditch runs, where shadows fall, where danger could hide. Fear is present, but controlled. Panic has no use here. Training is minimal, but experience fills the gap. You have lived through winters before. You know that dawn always comes eventually, even when it feels impossibly far away. As the sky begins to lighten, fatigue deepens. This is the most dangerous time. Attention slips. The body wants rest. You force yourself to remain alert until the gate is officially opened. When your shift ends, you return to a room still cold despite the brazier. Sleep comes quickly, and without dreams, you will rise again before nightfall to repeat the cycle. This is winter service in a medieval town. Quiet, repetitive, heavy with responsibility. And it raises a question that lingers in the cold stone air. What happened when a gatekeeper failed or chose wrongly during one of these long winter nights? As winter deepens, the role of the town gatekeeper becomes heavier in ways that are not immediately visible. The stone walls remain the same, the gate still opens and closes, and the rules do not change. What changes is the pressure beneath every decision. Cold does not simply numb the body, it sharpens consequences. You begin to notice patterns that only winter reveals. Fewer travelers arrive each day. Those who do are thinner, quieter, and more urgent. Wagons creak under frozen axles. Horses breathe hard and leave patches of frost where they stand. The road beyond the gate feels emptier, and emptiness itself becomes suspicious. Inside the town, supplies are watched carefully. Grain stores are counted and guarded. Entry is no longer a matter of commerce alone, but of survival. Each additional mouth inside the walls means less food for those already there. You are reminded of this often by town officials, sometimes directly and sometimes through silence. Your orders grow stricter. The gate is to be closed earlier. Exceptions require approval from someone with authority. This removes some responsibility from you, but not the burden. You are still the one who hears the knocking. You are still the one who sees faces in the dark. Winter nights test your judgment. A man arrives with frost in his beard and claims to be a merchant delayed by weather. His papers are stiff with ice. You cannot read them easily by candlelight. Letting him in could bring safety to one person or danger to many. Refusing him may seal his fate. You delay, sending for confirmation, knowing that delay itself is a decision. Sometimes the town regrets mercy. There are recorded cases of thieves entering under the cover of winter charity. Hunger drives people to risk everything. Gatekeepers are reminded of this. Whenever supplies go missing, suspicion settles into routine. Other times, the town regrets harshness. Illness spreads beyond the walls. A traveler dies in sight of the gate. Word travels quickly even in winter. Resentment grows quietly among the poor. You hear whispers when you walk through the market by day. You are the face of decisions you did not fully control. The physical toll of the work becomes clearer as weeks pass. Cold settles into your joints. Fingers lose some feeling. Small cuts heal slowly. Sleep is shallow and interrupted. You carry fatigue like a second cloak that never comes off. To manage this, you develop habits. You rotate your stance to keep blood moving. You warm your hands over the brazier, in short bursts. You chew hard bread slowly to make it last, and to give yourself something to focus on. You learn which hours are most dangerous for your attention, and prepare for them. Your relationship with other watchmen deepens through shared silence. There is little talk, but trust grows. You rely on each other to notice what you might miss. A shadow that moves differently. A sound that does not belong. Winter teaches cooperation without words. Storms isolate the town completely. Snow piles against the gate and must be cleared carefully so it does not freeze the mechanism. Ice forms in the lock and has to be chipped away gently. These tasks are slow and require patience. A rushed movement can break something that cannot be repaired until spring. During these storms you feel the vulnerability of the town more clearly. Walls protect, but they also trap. If fire breaks out, escape is limited. If disease spreads, it spreads inward. You are guarding not just against threats but against the town itself turning dangerous under pressure. Records from medieval towns show that winter nights were when rules were tested most often. Curfews were broken. Smuggling increased. Desperate people tried to slip in, under cover of darkness. Gatekeepers became both enforcers and witnesses to quiet acts of survival. Religion intersects with your duties as well. Certain holy days require processions or late gatherings. You must allow movement while still maintaining order. Churches request exceptions. Monasteries ask for passage for the sick or dying. Each request adds another layer to your judgment. As winter reaches its midpoint, rumors spread. Food shortages elsewhere. Bandits driven closer to towns. Lords increasing taxes despite the season. These rumors reach you first, carried by those who knock after hours. You cannot verify them, but they linger in your thoughts. Your sense of time changes. You begin to think in watches rather than days, in coldest hours rather than calendar dates. Spring becomes an idea rather than a certainty. There are moments of quiet pride, when the night passes without incident, when dawn comes and the town wakes safely. These moments are private. There is no applause. Your reward is simply that nothing happened. Yet, beneath this routine lies tension that does not fully release. You know that one night will be different. One decision will matter more than the rest. Winter compresses time and consequence until they meet sharply. And so as you stand again at the gate with frost forming along the stone, another question presses itself forward. When that moment finally came, when the gatekeeper faced a choice that could not be delayed or shared, what guided the decision, and what followed afterward? When the decisive moment arrives, it rarely announces itself. There is no dramatic signal, no clear separation between ordinary duty and lasting consequence. It comes disguised as another cold night, another sound beyond the gate, another choice that feels similar to all the others. This is how winter tests the town gatekeeper most deeply. On one such night, the cold is sharper than usual. The wind has scoured the streets clean of sound. Snow has hardened into ridges along the walls. You have been awake for hours, moving only enough to keep blood flowing. Fatigue presses against your thoughts, but habit keeps you alert. Then the knock comes. It is not loud, but it is deliberate. 3 firm strikes against wood stiff with frost. You pause and listen. No shouting follows. No pleading. Just the sound of breathing beyond the gate. You respond as trained, calling out for identification. The voice that answers is weak but controlled. It belongs to someone who understands rules. A woman traveling with 2 children, she says. Her husband died days ago on the road. They cannot go farther. The night is too cold. You send for a magistrate. None is immediately available. Storm conditions have slowed movement within the town. You are left with instructions that allow discretion in cases of visible danger. This is one of those cases. You ask questions. You listen for inconsistencies. You weigh the risk. Opening the gate could expose the town. Keeping it closed could condemn 3 people to death by cold. Winter sharpens this balance until it cuts. You choose to open the postern gate, the small door within the larger structure, just wide enough to admit them. Another watchman stands ready. You keep the main gate barred. The woman steps through first, her children clinging to her cloak. Their faces are pale and still. Inside the gatehouse they collapse. Near the brazier, you ration fuel carefully, but give enough to warm them. The children do not cry, they are too tired. You send word to the church and to the poor ward. By dawn they are moved inside the town. In the weeks that follow there is no immediate consequence. No theft traced to that night. No illness spreads. The town absorbs 3 more lives quietly. Spring comes eventually. The moment passes into memory. Not every story ends this way. Records also speak of nights when mercy led to harm, of thieves admitted, who opened gates from within, of disease carried inside walls, already weakened by hunger. Gatekeepers, who made such decisions, were sometimes dismissed or worse. What these stories share is not outcome but burden. The gatekeeper lived with the knowledge that winter demanded decisions no rule could fully cover. Responsibility settled not in authority but in presence. You were there. You heard the knock. You chose. When winter finally ends and your duty returns to a quieter rhythm, the memory of those nights remains. Even in summer when the gate stands open and children play nearby, you remember the weight of silence and frost. Your role fades into the background of history. Chroniclers do not record your name, yet the safety and survival of towns depended on such watchfulness repeated night after night across centuries. The long winter watch teaches a quiet lesson. History is not shaped only by grand strategies or famous figures. It is shaped by ordinary people standing still in the cold, making careful choices while others sleep. And even now, in a world of electric light and constant warmth, the idea remains. Someone somewhere is awake at night, guarding thresholds, making decisions that will never be noticed unless they fail. You begin this story with something so ordinary that it almost disappears from notice. A loaf of bread resting on a rough wooden table. In a medieval household, this loaf is more than food. It is time, labor, and survival made solid. In winter especially, bread becomes the center around which daily life quietly turns. You live in a world where bread is eaten at nearly every meal. Not the soft white bread imagined later in history, but dense, dark loaves made from rye, barley, oats, or mixtures of grains. Wheat bread exists but is rare, and usually reserved for the wealthy or for feast days. Your bread is heavy in the hand, and slow to stale but never truly soft. Grain determines whether a household survives the year. It is grown, cut, dried, threshed, winnowed, ground, and baked through months of effort. Each step carries risk. Weather, pests, illness, and simple accident can reduce the final amount. By the time winter arrives, the grain that remains is all there will be until the next harvest. You understand this without explanation. Every slice of bread is measured. Loaves are cut carefully so they last. Thick slices mean hunger later. Thin slices mean discipline. Now, children are taught early not to waste crumbs. Even fallen pieces are eaten, or fed to animals that will later provide food or labor. Bread is rarely eaten alone. It is dipped into pottage or used to soak up broth. It fills the stomach and gives warmth. The body burns its energy slowly. This makes bread essential during cold months, when calories mean heat. Salt is just as important though, far less visible. It preserves meat and fish. It flavors otherwise bland food. It replaces minerals lost through labor even in winter. Salt is expensive and tightly controlled. In some regions it is taxed heavily. Access to salt can mean the difference between survival and starvation. You do not sprinkle salt casually. You pinch it carefully. You know how long a salted piece of pork will last, and how much can be spared for each meal. Salting is done in late autumn when animals are slaughtered, because feeding them through winter would cost more grain than their meat is worth. Lean years arrive when harvests fail. This happens more often than chronicles suggest. A single bad summer can echo through an entire year. 2 bad summers can devastate a region. During such times, bread changes first. Grain is mixed with fillers such as peas, acorns, or ground bark. These additions are not chosen for taste but for volume. You taste the difference immediately. The bread is bitter or gritty. It sits heavily in the stomach, yet it still provides energy. Survival bread is not meant to please. It is meant to last. Communities develop shared rules around grain use during lean years. Mills may be regulated, so no one grinds more than their share. Bakers may be watched closely. Hoarding is feared and punished, because it threatens everyone. At the same time, quiet hoarding still happens. Families hide small reserves in walls or under floors. Trust is strained. Salt shortages are especially dangerous. Without salt, meat spoils quickly. Fish cannot be preserved. Diets become more monotonous, and nutrition suffers. Illness follows hunger closely. People weaken. Wounds heal slowly. Winter cold magnifies these effects. You notice that lean years change behavior. People move more slowly. Conversations shorten. Laughter fades. Energy is conserved. Work continues but with less force. Animals are worked harder because people cannot spare calories. Bread becomes a symbol of fairness and resentment. When some have more, and others less, tension grows. Religious teachings emphasize sharing but fear competes with faith. Charitable institutions such as monasteries distribute bread when possible, but their resources are limited. Records from medieval towns and villages show disputes over grain stores during hard winters, accusations of cheating weights, claims of hidden reserves. These disputes are rarely violent at first. They begin with words and silence. For children, lean years leave lasting marks. Growth slows, memories form around hunger. Many adults later recall winters by the taste of bad bread rather than by dates. Sensory memory carries history forward when written records do not. You learn to judge bread, not by flavor, but by effect. Does it keep you warm? Does it allow you to work? Does it last through the week? These are the measures that matter. As winter deepens and grain bins lower, the question becomes unavoidable. How long will the bread last? And what happens when it does not? Communities have answers, but none are easy. And so as you break another careful slice from a dwindling loaf, one thought lingers in the quiet room. When bread truly ran out, how did medieval people respond, and what choices did hunger force them to make? As winter progresses in a lean year, you begin to understand that hunger is not a single moment, but a slow narrowing of options. It does not arrive suddenly. It advances quietly as stores shrink and alternatives disappear. Bread remains at the center of this process, because it is both the most common food and the most revealing measure of scarcity. At first the changes are subtle. Loaves grow slightly smaller. The crust thickens as bakers try to stretch dough further. Grain mixtures shift again. More barley, less rye, more fillers added without announcement. Everyone notices, but few speak of it directly. You adjust your expectations. Meals become simpler. Portions are counted carefully. You eat more slowly to feel fuller longer. Children are encouraged to drink more broth, to fill space in their stomachs. Hunger becomes something managed, rather than solved. Salt is guarded even more tightly now. Without enough salt, the last preserved meats begin to spoil. Households inspect barrels and hanging cuts daily. Mold is scraped away if possible. When spoilage cannot be stopped, meat is boiled heavily and eaten quickly. Waste is avoided at all costs. Communal meals become rarer. Sharing food feels dangerous when each family is uncertain of its own future. Yet complete isolation is impossible. Villages are too small. People see each other every day and judge each other by what appears on the table. Tension grows quietly. A family whose bread seems thicker draws attention. Someone whose children look less thin is noticed. Envy mixes with suspicion. Accusations rarely begin openly. They begin with silence and watching. Authorities respond unevenly. Some lords release grain reserves to maintain order. Others protect their stores and let hunger sort itself out. Town councils may fix prices or ration sales. These measures help some and anger others. Fairness becomes difficult to define when survival is uneven. In extreme cases, bread riots occur. These are not sudden explosions but accumulated frustration breaking through. People demand access to grain they believe exists, but is withheld. Such moments are remembered long after hunger fades, because they reveal cracks in social order. Religion plays a complex role. Sermons emphasize patience, charity, and trust. Fasting is reframed as virtue rather than necessity. For some this offers comfort. For others it feels hollow when children cry from hunger. Monasteries and churches distribute bread when they can. Their loaves are often the simplest but deeply valued. Lines form quietly. Pride is swallowed. Accepting charity becomes part of survival. You begin to notice how hunger changes the body. Hands tremble more often. Cold feels sharper. Sleep becomes restless. Small illnesses linger. Women and children suffer first and most visibly. Men continue heavy labor even when energy is low because fields and animals still demand care. People make difficult calculations. Seed grain is weighed against immediate hunger. Eating it may mean surviving winter, but risking spring planting. Some choose one, some the other. Outcomes vary, and are often judged harshly after the fact. Migration increases during lean years. Those with nothing left leave in search of work or food. Winter travel is dangerous, but staying can be worse. Villages thin out. Empty houses appear. These absences are felt long after. Stories spread of worse places and better ones. Most are exaggerated. Hope travels faster than truth. Still people move because doing nothing feels like surrender. Children remember these winters with clarity. The taste of bad bread, the sound of empty bins, the careful slicing. These memories shape how they behave as adults. Scarcity teaches habits that last beyond a crisis. As winter nears its end, the question becomes sharper. Who will last until spring, and at what cost? Bread has carried you this far, but it cannot solve everything. And so as another loaf is divided thinner than the last, a harder question settles into the room. When bread and salt could no longer hold a community together, what final measures did medieval people take to survive, and what lines did they refuse to cross? When bread and salt can no longer carry a household through winter, survival becomes a matter of limits rather than plans. At this stage, there are no easy substitutions left. The land is still frozen, trade is stalled, and reserves are gone. What remains are choices shaped by custom, fear, and the boundaries of what a community believes it can accept. You see this first in the way people search for food beyond normal sources. Roots are dug from frozen ground when possible. Tree bark is stripped and dried, then ground into flour. Acorns are leached repeatedly to remove bitterness. These foods provide little nourishment, but they quiet hunger briefly. Knowledge of such practices is passed quietly, often by older villagers who remember earlier famines. Animals that would normally be kept alive are slaughtered early. Work animals are spared as long as possible, because they represent future survival. When even these are killed, it is a sign of deep desperation. The decision is heavy, and often shared among family members, rather than made alone. Communities turn inward. Sharing narrows to immediate kin. Households merge. Multiple families sleep and eat together, to conserve fuel and food. Privacy disappears. Tension increases, but so does mutual dependence. In these spaces, conflict and cooperation exist side by side. Social rules are tested. Theft rises not from malice, but from need. Responses vary. Some communities punish harshly to protect limited resources. Others look away, understanding that punishment does not create food. These choices shape how villages remember themselves after the crisis ends. Historical records show that even in extreme hunger, certain lines are rarely crossed. Cannibalism appears in sources only during the most severe famines, and is described with horror and shame. Its rarity matters. It shows that cultural boundaries remain strong even when survival was threatened. More common is abandonment. Children are left at monastery doors. The elderly are allowed to fade quietly. These acts are not framed as cruelty, but as resignation. The community accepts loss as inevitable, and focuses on those who can still contribute. As winter breaks, and the first signs of spring appear, survival shifts again. Hunger does not end immediately. Bodies are weakened. Disease follows. The period after famine can be as deadly as the famine itself. Recovery is slow and uneven. Those who survive carry the memory forward. Lean years are remembered long after good harvests return. They influence marriage choices, saving habits and trust. People who lived through hunger tend to prepare more carefully and share less easily. Bread regains its place gradually. Loaves grow larger. Salt becomes more available. Taste returns. But the memory of tasteless survival bread lingers. It becomes a reference point for hardship. These cycles repeat across medieval centuries. They rarely appear in grand histories, but they shape populations deeply. Birth rates fall. Migration patterns change. Political unrest often follows years of hunger. Looking back, bread and salt seem simple, yet they supported entire societies through conditions that tested human limits. Their absence reveals how thin the line between order and collapse can be. In modern times, food scarcity still exists, but it is often hidden by distance and systems. Medieval hunger was immediate, visible, and shared. It shaped values, behaviors, and memories in ways that lasted generations. The story of bread and salt is not just about food. It is about restraint, cooperation, and the quiet decisions that allow communities to endure without breaking entirely. And as this story closes, another begins to form. If bread defined survival, where and how people slept defined warmth, safety, and rest during these same harsh seasons. That question leads forward into another quiet corner of medieval life. You enter this story at night, because that is when the subject truly reveals itself. Daylight hides many things. Night exposes them slowly and without decoration. In a medieval world, sleep is not a private retreat or a carefully designed comfort. It is a practical response to exhaustion and cold, shaped by space, custom, and necessity. You lie down not because you are relaxed, but because your body can no longer stay upright. Sleep is claimed wherever warmth, safety, and familiarity overlap. For the poor and the forgotten, this usually means the same places where they work, eat, and gather during the day. Your home, if you have one, is a single room. It holds everything: hearth tools, food, animals, storage, and people. There is no separate sleeping chamber. When night comes, the room simply changes purpose. Tools are pushed aside. Benches become beds. The fire is banked, and everyone arranges themselves around its fading warmth. Beds, as later centuries imagine them, are rare. A bed is a wooden frame, if the household is fortunate. More often, it is a pallet made from straw, dried leaves, or chaff spread directly on the floor. This material is insulating at first, but flattens quickly. It must be replaced when possible. But winter makes replacement difficult. You understand the ground beneath you well. You know which spots stay drier. You know where drafts creep in, Position matters. Older family members are given places closer to the hearth. Children are placed between adults where body heat collects. This arrangement is not sentimental. It is calculated. Blankets are heavy wool when available. They are rough and smell of smoke and use. Wool is valued because it traps warmth, even when damp. Linen sheets exist but are thin and offer little insulation. Many people sleep without sheets at all. Clothing remains on the body at night. You sleep fully dressed. Tunic, hose, cloak, hood, and sometimes even shoes remain on. Removing clothing wastes heat and risks dampness. The idea of nightwear is unknown. Comfort is secondary to preservation. Privacy does not exist in the way you might expect. Families sleep together. Servants sleep near masters. Lodgers sleep wherever space allows. Bodies are close. Breath is shared. This closeness reduces heat loss but also spreads illness. Coughs pass easily from one to another. Animals share sleeping spaces as well. A cow or goat might be kept indoors or in a connected stall. Chickens roost overhead. Their presence raises the temperature slightly and provides reassurance. Their sounds become part of the night. A shift, a breath, a quiet movement. For those without stable homes, sleep is even more uncertain. The poor, the elderly, without family and travelers seek shelter where they can. Sometimes this is a barn, sometimes a porch, sometimes the floor of a church if allowed. These spaces offer limited protection from cold but better than open ground. Churches play a complicated role. They are stone and cold, but they offer enclosure. Some allow the poor to sleep inside during extreme weather, others forbid it. Decisions vary by region and leadership. Charity competes with order. In towns, sleeping arrangements reflect crowding. Houses are stacked closely. Upper floors are reached by ladders or narrow stairs. Heat rises, so sleeping above ground is warmer, but more dangerous if fire breaks out. People choose warmth despite the risk. Fire is both friend and threat at night. Hearths are banked with ash to preserve embers. This practice reduces flame, but smoke still fills the room. Breathing is shallow. Eyes burn. Long-term damage is common but unnoticed. Sleep itself is not continuous. People wake often. Cold, hunger, and discomfort interrupt rest. Many practice segmented sleep without naming it. They sleep, wake briefly, then sleep again. Night prayers, quiet tasks, or tending the fire fill these intervals. Dreams are influenced by hardship, fear, and memory blend. People dream of warmth, of full meals, of lost summers. Nightmares are accepted as part of life. They are sometimes interpreted as signs or warnings. For the sick, sleep becomes both refuge and risk. Fever brings warmth, but also weakness. Families keep the ill near the hearth. Bedding is changed rarely in winter. Cleanliness yields to necessity. The forgotten members of society experience night most harshly. Widows without support, disabled laborers, orphans. Their sleeping places are precarious. They rely on charity or endurance. Many do not survive severe winters. Records from hospitals, almshouses, and monasteries describe rows of sleepers sharing space. Beds are shared by strangers. Turnover is constant. Warmth is collective or absent. Children grow accustomed to this from birth. They learn to sleep through noise, movement, and cold. Their bodies adapt. Their expectations form around endurance rather than comfort. As you lie among others listening to breath and wind, you understand that sleep here is not escape, it is pause, a temporary surrender to exhaustion with hope of waking. Morning comes slowly, bodies unfold stiffly, straw is shaken out if possible, the room shifts back into a place of work. Night leaves little trace except fatigue. These sleeping arrangements shape health, relationships, and memory. They teach closeness, tolerance, and resilience. They also carry risks that accumulate quietly over years. And yet one question remains unanswered in the dimness before dawn. How did these sleeping practices change during times of extreme cold, illness, or crowding? And what happened when rest itself became impossible? As winter deepens, sleeping arrangements among the poor grow more strategic, dictated by cold, scarcity, and the quiet rhythms of survival. What began as a single night of simple arrangement becomes a repeated ritual, one that shapes behavior, relationships, and even perception of danger. Each night, families and individuals adapt to conditions they cannot change, and their choices ripple across the household and the wider community. You notice first how bodies are used as insulation. Adults position themselves to shield children from drafts, sometimes layering themselves atop pallets in order to trap warmth. In crowded homes, Even a neighbor might be pressed into shared space, a decision made less out of companionship than necessity. Closeness generates heat, but also friction. Arguments over who gets the hearth or the warmest corner are common. Elderly family members, fragile in winter, often receive preference, leaving younger adults and children to adjust to colder edges. The placement of animals continues to play a crucial role. A cow in a corner, a goat tucked near the wall. These animals provide modest warmth, but also increase humidity, which can worsen illness if care is not taken. Chickens roost above sleeping people, and their clucking and movement becomes a background rhythm, sometimes comforting, sometimes frustrating. Still, few question the arrangement. Survival trumps comfort. During particularly harsh nights, improvisation becomes vital. Doors may be propped closed with extra straw to keep drafts from entering. Blankets and cloaks are layered over one another, sometimes held in place with rope or cord. Footwear is often worn to bed, especially for those with circulation problems. Despite the discomfort, people adapt to cold with repeated trial and error, noticing which combinations retain the most warmth, or which areas of the room tend to remain frozen despite the hearth. Crowding increases social tension. In towns, one house may host multiple families. Floors are covered with straw to demarcate sleeping spaces, yet personal boundaries are almost non-existent. These arrangements teach patience, observation, and sometimes resentment. Silent compromises are formed each night, like agreeing not to shift positions for fear of disturbing others, or rotating placement so no one freezes entirely. Hygiene becomes a constant, if insufficient, concern. Bedding is rarely changed in winter. Sweat, body oils, and the inevitable spills from food accumulate. Flies are gone during cold months, but lice and fleas persist. Some households attempt to smoke the space briefly, with small amounts of burning herbs to deter pests, but smoke can worsen respiratory issues. The trade-offs between warmth and health are continuous. Segmentation of sleep, long periods interrupted by brief wakefulness, is common. Many people rise periodically to tend fires, check on animals, or move children who have become chilled. This segmented sleep is not a choice but a necessity dictated by environment and routine. Over time, inhabitants adapt biologically. Their bodies develop resilience to interrupted rest, a survival skill honed across generations. Illness amplifies the danger. A cough, fever, or frostbite can spread quickly in the tightly packed sleeping spaces. Families must balance care with self-preservation. They place the sick closer to the hearth, provide extra blankets, and monitor their breathing. Decisions about tending to illness can mean sacrificing warmth elsewhere. Winter makes these trade-offs a nightly reality. Communal spaces for sleeping, barns, churches, or almshouses, reflect similar patterns but on a larger scale. Rows of pallets or straw-strewn floors hold dozens of people, sometimes strangers, pressed together for warmth. In such environments, personal belongings are kept to a minimum. Hunger, cold, and the threat of disease form bonds among strangers, as well as tension. Records show that people often survived winters in these spaces only through cooperation, sharing body heat, and monitoring each other's condition. Children adapt quickly to these conditions. They learn to fall asleep despite noise, movement, and cold. Their survival depends on observation, where the warmth concentrates, which bodies offer heat, which spaces are too drafty. Over years, these lessons form instincts that persist into adulthood. Adults, meanwhile, remain acutely aware of the fragility of life around them. Every night is a rehearsal of survival, every dawn a quiet triumph. In some cases, extreme conditions push sleep itself to the edge of impossibility. Frost penetrates poorly insulated rooms. Fuel runs dangerously low. Hunger gnaws too sharply to allow rest. People sleep in shifts when possible, trading warmth for alertness. They wake to check on neighbors, to stir embers, or to retrieve hidden food stores. Sleep becomes fragmented, almost tactical, emphasizing endurance rather than restfulness. Throughout these nights, memory and oral tradition record what is necessary for survival. Families share instructions on layering, animal placement, and fire maintenance. Communities transmit knowledge about how to survive long, bitter winters without dying from cold or starvation. Even minor innovations, a rope to keep blankets in place, a pallet arrangement that preserves heat, become part of a collective understanding. And yet, despite all these adaptations, one question lingers in the quiet cold of medieval nights. When every measure has been taken, when every human body has been pressed close to share warmth, what happens if the winter proves too long or the fire too weak, and sleep itself becomes a danger rather than a refuge. As winter reaches its deepest point, the practical choices of medieval sleep transform into matters of survival, and the boundaries between comfort, safety, and life blur. When fuel dwindles, temperatures drop further, and hunger gnaws relentlessly, sleep is no longer restful. It is a strategy, a calculated surrender to exhaustion, while maintaining the faintest margin between life and death. In the smallest homes, the hearth becomes the axis around which all sleeping arrangements revolve. Families cluster close enough to share body heat, but not so close as to suffocate or worsen illness. Adults shield children and the infirm with their own bodies. The elderly may be placed at the center, protected by multiple layers and the warmth of younger relatives. The need to survive outweighs comfort or privacy entirely. When firewood runs critically low, creative solutions emerge. Ashes from previous nights are banked to preserve heat. Straw and dried leaves are piled for insulation. Animals, if they survive indoors, serve both as warmth and as a source of mild comfort. Chickens roosting overhead, goats tucked into corners, and the occasional cat or dog become part of the household's thermal strategy. Each living presence matters. Illness makes sleep precarious. Fevered bodies require monitoring. A coughing child or shivering adult may disrupt others, but care cannot be ignored. Families develop routines. Someone wakes periodically to stoke embers, check on the weakest members, or adjust coverings. Segmented sleep becomes not an inconvenience, but a survival skill. Rest is measured in fragments, and even a brief doze counts. Crowded or communal sleeping spaces, such as almshouses or barns, magnify both risks and benefits. Heat is shared, sometimes across dozens of individuals, many strangers. Disease spreads easily, yet isolation would leave weaker bodies exposed to frost. Survival relies on cooperation, tacit agreements, and constant vigilance. Even minor infractions, hoarding bedding, shifting positions carelessly, can imperil multiple lives. Psychologically, these winters leave indelible marks. Children internalize discipline, patience, and the value of warmth. Adults endure guilt, vigilance, and exhaustion silently. Stories are passed orally, describing not only the mechanics of survival, how to layer blankets, position bodies, or stoke embers, but also the emotional labor of watching over others night after night. Memory and habit become survival tools, as critical as straw or firewood. Historical accounts reveal the limits of endurance. Some nights claimed lives despite careful planning. A sudden freeze, a failed hearth, or an illness could mean the difference between waking and never waking. Death was intimate, quiet, and often invisible. Families observed it with grim pragmatism. It became part of the unspoken record that structured future preparations passed down through generations. When spring arrives, it does not immediately erase the hardship. Sleep returns to longer, less fragmented cycles, and warmth spreads more easily. But the knowledge of what was endured lingers. Families continue to arrange sleeping spaces with caution. Even abundant firewood or improved bedding cannot erase the instinct to preserve warmth, anticipate shortage, and remain vigilant against the returning winter. In retrospect, these sleeping practices shaped communities profoundly. Close quarters taught cooperation, observation, and shared responsibility. They reinforced hierarchies, but also created bonds of interdependence. Habits developed under duress became cultural memory, influencing how future generations prepared for hardship. They left traces not in monuments but in routines, oral traditions, and survival instincts. The story of medieval sleep among the poor and forgotten reminds us that ordinary life holds profound lessons. Comfort, warmth, and rest are never guaranteed. Survival is built through careful observation, cooperation, and endurance. It demonstrates that the history of human life is as much about quiet adaptation and resilience as it is about battles, kings, or revolutions. And yet a lingering thought remains, one that the winter nights themselves never answer fully. What happens when even vigilance, preparation, and cooperation fail, and the cold overwhelms the body, the hearth, and the human spirit alike? This question leads inevitably to the next corner of medieval life, where danger is immediate and consequences unavoidable. You enter this story standing at the edge of a medieval village, when the first snow begins to fall, soft at first, then faster, heavier, until it blankets the roofs and fields in white. In most histories, snow is a picturesque backdrop, but for a medieval villager, it is a force that can isolate, endanger, and redefine daily life. Survival is no longer about work or routine. It becomes a struggle against immovable cold and the sudden absence of outside help. Villages are clustered strategically, near water, near arable land, but they are not immune to the whims of winter. When blizzards arrive, roads vanish under drifts, and paths are hidden beneath layers of ice. Communication with neighboring towns or markets is interrupted. The village becomes self-contained, entirely dependent on its own stored resources and the resilience of its people. Preparation begins long before the first flake falls. Grain stores must be sufficient, fodder for animals secured, and firewood amassed. Every family inspects its holdings. Barrels of salted meat, piles of root vegetables, and dried grains are counted carefully. Surplus is rare. Even a single miscalculation can be fatal if a blizzard persists longer than expected. The physical labor to secure the village is immense. Roofs must be cleared to prevent collapse under the weight of snow. Chimneys are inspected for blockages, because proper ventilation becomes critical when fires burn day and night. Water, if not stored in barrels, must be drawn and heated in anticipation of frozen wells. Every step anticipates the coming isolation. When the blizzard finally strikes, its force is immediate and unrelenting. Wind drives snow against doors and walls, and the world outside becomes indistinguishable from the sky above. Visibility drops to a few feet. Travel is impossible. Livestock in fields may perish if not brought under shelter. The village transforms from a community with daily interactions into a cluster of isolated households, each battling the same enemy: cold, darkness, and scarcity. Inside homes, routines shift sharply. Kitchens and hearths become lifelines. Fires burn continuously, consuming precious fuel. Smoke fills the rooms. Families sleep closer together to conserve warmth. The rhythm of life slows. Work that is possible indoors, spinning, mending, small repairs, is done meticulously, not for productivity, but to keep hands moving, circulation active, and minds occupied. Food is rationed even more stringently than usual. Meals shrink to minimal portions to ensure that supplies last. Bread is sliced thinly, pottage diluted with water or root vegetables. Salt is sparingly used, saved for preserving the few cuts of meat left from autumn. Every crumb is accounted for. Waste is unthinkable. Isolation magnifies vulnerability. Illnesses that might have been minor in other seasons become dangerous. Children, weak from cold and hunger, cough through long nights. Adults labor despite fatigue because tending the sick is critical. If one family fails to care for its own, the consequences ripple outward when survival of the village depends on collective strength. Blizzards also alter social behavior. Travel between homes becomes risky, sometimes impossible. Barriers of snow and ice force communities to negotiate care and resources more formally, relying on messengers or observation from windows. Everyone understands that generosity is limited by survival needs. Shared labor, such as clearing heavy snow from streets or feeding communal livestock, is coordinated carefully, balancing necessity with risk. Noise is minimal during a blizzard. The snow absorbs sound. Children move quietly, adults whisper, and even animals adjust to conserve energy. The white silence is both protective and oppressive. It masks predators but amplifies every small threat inside the village. The absence of routine communication creates anxiety, a heightened awareness that the world has become simultaneously smaller and more dangerous. In some villages, extreme storms result in temporary fortifications. Doors are reinforced with snowdrifts, windows covered with layers of cloth, and makeshift corridors are carved to maintain access between critical spaces. Every effort is aimed at survival, not comfort. Even small mistakes, a door left slightly ajar, an ember falling, can threaten lives during a prolonged blizzard. Children learn quickly. They memorize routes between hearths and storage areas, adapt to the bitter cold, and understand that asking for food or warmth must be measured. Their education in these months is practical, focused on endurance and observation rather than abstract learning. Survival is the curriculum, experience the teacher. As the days stretch into weeks, morale becomes a subtle yet crucial factor. Families rely on routines, oral storytelling, prayer, and small acts of shared labor to maintain mental stability. Nights are long, and each day that passes without disaster feels like a victory. Winter may strip the land of color and ease, but human effort maintains continuity in rhythm, heat, and food. Yet, even amid careful preparation, uncertainty always remains. How long will the blizzard last? Will stored grain suffice? Will illness strike someone crucial to the household's survival? Every night brings these questions to the forefront, unanswered and relentless. They form the silent rhythm of life during a medieval winter storm, pressing on the minds and bodies of villagers in ways that warmth and sun could never teach. And so, as snow piles higher against doors and the wind shrieks through narrow streets, one thought lingers: what happens when preparation fails, when blizzards last longer than the stores or strength of a village, and winter itself becomes a threat impossible to master? The second week of a blizzard transforms a village from a collection of households into a microcosm of endurance, where each person's actions reverberate across the small community. The first days of snow bring novelty, even beauty, but as ice thickens and visibility drops to nothing, life shifts entirely to survival. Every choice is sharpened by cold, scarcity, and the knowledge that external help is out of reach. Inside homes, routines become precise, almost ritualized. Fires burn continuously, fed by carefully measured wood. The hearth is both source of life and risk. Embers can ignite stray straw, smoke can suffocate, yet without it, warmth disappears. Families assign roles for tending the fire in shifts, ensuring that someone is always awake to adjust fuel and maintain ventilation. These shifts dictate sleep patterns. Rest is segmented and strategic, not restorative. Food becomes the dominant concern. Early blizzard preparations that seemed sufficient now strain under weeks of snow. Bread is rationed thinly, pottage stretched with water or root vegetables, meat sparingly consumed and preserved under layers of cloth or snow to prevent spoilage. Salt is meticulously measured. Too much now means nothing later. Every crumb is valued. Older children learn to handle responsibilities beyond their age, distributing meals, checking supplies, and even assisting the sick. Illness, already an ever-present risk in medieval life, becomes more dangerous. Frostbite, respiratory infections, and weakened immunity threaten those already vulnerable. Families create makeshift isolation areas where possible, using spare straw or blankets to separate the sick from others. Yet complete isolation is impossible in crowded homes. Care and exposure are intertwined. Survival depends not only on material resources, but also on the endurance, judgment, and vigilance of every household member. Social dynamics shift as the blizzard continues. While the streets are impassable, the village still requires collective effort, communal responsibilities. Feeding shared livestock, clearing snow from main walkways, or checking vulnerable neighbors must be coordinated carefully. Messages between households are delivered through windows, or by braving shallow drifts. Each journey is calculated for risk. Trust and cooperation are tested daily. Those who fail to participate or hoard resources face subtle forms of social pressure, disapproval, gossip, or outright exclusion from shared labor. Children adapt remarkably to these harsh conditions. They memorize the layout of homes and paths, even under shifting snow and darkness. They learn to navigate treacherous areas, fetch water from frozen wells, and manage small responsibilities. Play disappears, replaced by practical tasks. Yet even these moments carry lessons in endurance, observation, and the value of cooperation. Survival becomes the hidden curriculum of youth. Long nights magnify fear and imagination. The sound of the wind echoing against timber and stone, the creak of snow-laden roofs, or the distant lowing of cattle outside, can create an atmosphere of heightened alertness. Villagers are constantly aware of risk, yet must balance vigilance with the exhaustion that comes from prolonged cold and labor. Some households keep small rituals, prayers, storytelling, counting embers to maintain morale and structure. As days stretch on, the psychological strain intensifies. Isolation feeds anxiety. Seeing neighbors through windows or from a distance, their own struggles mirrored, fosters both empathy and quiet competition. Comparing food stores, warmth, and comfort becomes unavoidable. Social cohesion is constantly renegotiated, mediated by need and opportunity. Outside the village, the blizzard transforms the surrounding landscape. Forests and fields vanish under white. Frozen rivers may block routes used for trade or escape. Predators like wolves, desperate and driven closer to human settlements by the snow, occasionally threaten livestock or even people who venture out. These dangers heighten vigilance and reinforce the importance of remaining indoors when possible. And yet, despite careful preparation and communal effort, the unknown remains. How long will supplies last? Which household will falter first? Will sickness claim someone critical to the village's survival? Every household faces these questions silently, night after night. In the quiet of the snowbound village, a lingering thought presses itself forward. When winter refuses to relent, when blizzards persist beyond expectation? What happens to a community when endurance fails? And how do those left behind rebuild after nature itself has tested their limits? The third week of a blizzard brings clarity. The line between endurance and disaster is thinner than anyone dared imagine. Villages cut off by snow experience not just isolation, but the slow intensification of every danger. Hunger deepens, illness spreads, and cold penetrates even the best prepared homes. Decisions made in earlier weeks, once small and mundane, now carry weight that can determine life or death. Households settle into a rhythm of survival, each day divided between tending fires, rationing food, caring for the sick, and checking on neighbors where possible. Firewood, once plentiful, is now strictly measured. Every ember counts, every misplaced piece of straw carries risk. People sleep lightly, or in shifts, conscious that vigilance is as essential as warmth. The body's exhaustion grows alongside mental strain, yet work cannot stop. A single lapse, a door left ajar, a fire allowed to smolder, can have immediate consequences. Food becomes more than sustenance. It becomes leverage, negotiation, and a test of community cohesion. Rations shrink, and families make careful calculations. A few extra mouthfuls tonight may endanger tomorrow's survival. Bread, once relatively abundant, becomes treasured. Even bitter or spoiled slices are eaten to stave off starvation. Salt, essential for preserving the last meat, is measured with precision. Households that miscalculate may be forced to rely entirely on neighbors' charity or face hunger. Illness during this period is particularly cruel. Frostbite, respiratory infections, and the effects of prolonged cold weaken bodies already deprived of adequate nutrition. Caregiving is constant and exhausting, and the sick cannot be fully isolated. Families navigate a fragile balance, tending the ill without overexposing others to risk, maintaining warmth without exhausting fuel, keeping spirits up without underestimating danger. Every action has consequences that reverberate beyond the household. Social cohesion is tested in unprecedented ways. Neighbors who once shared lightly now negotiate every act of generosity carefully. Walking across streets buried in drifts becomes a deliberate choice. Stories circulate of villagers who perish when caught outside, or whose food stores run dry. Observing these events shapes behavior. Some respond with increased cooperation, others with guarded self-preservation. Trust is fragile, yet the village cannot survive without it. Children continue to adapt, learning lessons in endurance, observation, and responsibility far beyond their years. They memorize routes through snowbound streets, understand the timing of rationing, and assist in caring for livestock or siblings. The blizzard teaches them survival skills that will outlast the storm itself, embedding knowledge that will persist in oral tradition and daily habit. Outside threats amplify the danger. Starving wildlife, driven closer to human settlement by the snow, can endanger livestock or even people who must venture out. Roofs collapse under heavy snow, wells freeze. Even with careful planning, nature imposes unpredictability that cannot be fully mitigated. Villagers confront these risks daily, adapting as best they can, yet aware that control is limited. When the blizzard finally begins to ease, its end does not mark immediate relief. Food stores are depleted, exhaustion lingers, disease may follow, homes require repair, and recovery of livestock and fields is slow. The community must rebuild both material resources and morale. The experience leaves lasting imprints, habits formed under pressure, social bonds tested and sometimes strengthened, and memories of endurance that influence how villagers respond to future winters. Medieval chronicles rarely detail these small grinding struggles, yet they shaped communities profoundly. Survival depended on knowledge, cooperation, and vigilance. Those who lived through prolonged isolation carried forward lessons in preparation, rationing, and the management of both human and environmental threats. The winter blizzard was not just a test of bodies but of social fabric, teaching resilience through lived experience. And as the snow finally melts and the village emerges into sunlight, one question remains, unanswerable yet haunting. When nature tests limits this severely, how many of the small sacrifices, the decisions to ration or to share, and the nights spent awake by fire and frozen walls determine the line between a community's survival and its collapse? You begin this story standing in a frozen field, where the soil has hardened into a surface that cracks beneath your feet. Winter is not just a season. In medieval Europe, it is an adversary that challenges every aspect of daily life, especially for the farmers who provide the sustenance for entire communities. Survival requires careful planning, endurance, and an intimate knowledge of the land, weather, and human limits. The first concern is crops. Fields lie fallow beneath snow or frost. But preparation begins months earlier. Farmers must plan for seed selection, storage and rotation, anticipating the harshest winters. Rye and barley dominate, hardy grains that withstand frost better than wheat. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots are stored in pits covered with straw or soil to prevent freezing. A miscalculation in storage or sowing could result in famine, a lesson learned repeatedly over centuries. Livestock is equally critical. Cows, sheep, pigs and goats require shelter and food through months of snow. Hay must be harvested in summer and stored carefully to prevent rot, a labor-intensive process essential for survival. Farmers understand that without fodder, animals die, and without animals, families lose milk, meat, labor, and trade goods. Every bale of hay, every measured scoop of grain, becomes a small decision with enormous consequences. Winter labor is relentless. Fields are frozen, but animals still require care. Water must be fetched from wells or melted ice, fires maintained in barns to prevent freezing, and shelters reinforced to withstand snow and wind. Farmers and their families work from dawn until the sun is low, often exposed to wind chill that numbs fingers and slows movement. Gloves are primitive, mittens rare, and hands develop thick calluses to endure frost. The diet of a medieval farming household in winter is minimal but functional. Bread from stored grain, pottage of dried legumes, and preserved meats form the core of meals. Salt, again, is precious, used sparingly to maintain the last cuts of pork or fish. Families ration food carefully, understanding that hunger will worsen if supplies are mismanaged. The body adapts slowly, burning calories efficiently, but fatigue remains constant. Shelter is equally vital. Homes are typically simple structures of timber, wattle, and daub, often with thatched roofs. Windows are small and covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Fireplaces are rudimentary, often inefficient, providing uneven heat. Families sleep close together to conserve warmth, layering themselves under wool or linen blankets, often with animals in the same room. The cold penetrates even indoors, shaping every action from cooking to childcare. Community and cooperation become survival tools. Farmers share labor, exchanging tasks such as clearing snow, repairing fences, or caring for neighbors' livestock. Markets close or become inaccessible in deep winter, so trade is limited to essentials or barter within the village. Social networks, often informal and extended, are critical to distribute risk and resources. Isolation can be fatal, making mutual dependence a requirement rather than a choice. Preparation for emergencies is a constant mental burden. Farmers anticipate potential disasters, blizzards, ice storms, disease, and equipment failure. They maintain spare tools, reinforce shelters, and preserve extra food whenever possible. Failure in these measures can be catastrophic, not only for the family but for those dependent on their produce or livestock. Medieval records indicate that even minor mistakes, such as insufficient hay or poorly stored grain, could have consequences felt across entire parishes. Children learn survival quickly. From an early age they understand rationing, basic animal care, and how to navigate snowbound paths. Their lessons are practical, often learned by observation or direct instruction. Adolescents assist in household labor, manage small fields, and contribute to the collective maintenance of winter stores. Early exposure to these hardships shapes expectations and skills that carry into adulthood. Even routine movement becomes dangerous in the harsh cold. Icy paths, hidden ditches, and compacted snow increase the risk of injury. A broken limb or frostbitten hand can limit one's ability to work, with consequences that ripple through food production and social obligations. Every trip outside, whether to fetch water or check animals, is a calculated risk, balancing necessity with danger. And yet, despite preparation, caution, and resilience, winter retains a cruel unpredictability. Storms can last weeks, freezing rivers, burying roads, and threatening both people and livestock. A single misjudged night, a fire that dies too soon, or a poorly stored sack of grain can create crises that ripple beyond the individual household. As you watch frost forming on the edges of door frames and hear the wind rattling against the roof, one thought remains: when nature itself imposes limits so severe, what choices did medieval farmers make to preserve both life and livelihood? And how did these strategies shape the resilience of entire communities? As winter deepens, the day-to-day existence of medieval farmers becomes a relentless negotiation with frost, snow, and scarcity. The earlier measures of preparation, stockpiling grain, gathering firewood, reinforcing shelters, must now be paired with constant vigilance and improvisation. Survival is no longer about planning alone. It is about adapting in real time to the relentless cold. Inside homes, the hearth is central. Fires are maintained continuously, fed with split logs and dried brush. Smoke fills the rooms, stinging eyes and leaving a thin layer on walls, but warmth is indispensable. Families rotate duties. Some tend the fire while others check animals or prepare the next rationed meal. Sleep is fragmented. Even at night, someone must be awake to monitor embers and ensure that the fire does not die. These shifts dictate how bodies recover or fail to recover. Over time, food management becomes increasingly strategic. Grain stores are measured daily. Porridge, bread, and preserved legumes are portioned carefully. Meat, already limited, is rationed and sometimes buried in snow or covered with straw to extend its shelf life. Salt, the precious preservative, is used sparingly. Every decision about what to consume and when is calculated to prolong survival until spring. The margin for error is vanishingly small. Livestock require constant attention. Frosted fields cannot provide grazing, so animals rely entirely on stored fodder. Hay and straw are doled out in measured quantities, ensuring that animals remain alive but not overfed. Farmers adjust feeding schedules according to temperature, energy expenditure, and the animal's visible condition. Even minor miscalculations, too little feed one day or too much another, can weaken stock, reducing the household's long-term viability. Illness and injury magnify these difficulties. Frostbite, respiratory infections, and exhaustion afflict both humans and animals. Families must care for the sick without compromising the warmth or resources of the rest of the household. A cough or fever spreads quickly in confined spaces, and minor injuries can become deadly if left untreated due to exposure or lack of mobility. Constant monitoring is essential. One lapse could endanger many. Social structures within villages adapt to winter constraints. Households that are more successful at conserving resources may lend assistance to neighbors, providing a handful of grain, sharing firewood, or checking on the elderly. Yet this aid is cautious and measured. Each family knows that overextension could jeopardize its own survival. Mutual reliance is essential, but trust is constantly tested, especially when resources are dangerously low. Children and adolescents play vital roles. They haul water, feed animals, and assist with food preparation. Movement outdoors is perilous. Icy surfaces, snowdrifts, and hidden ditches pose constant threats. Yet, children learn quickly to navigate these hazards. Their knowledge of the village layout, weather patterns, and household routines becomes indispensable to collective survival. Sleep in these weeks is heavily compromised. Adults wake repeatedly to stoke fires, check on livestock, or manage rationing. Crowded sleeping arrangements conserve heat, but disease and fatigue are ever-present companions. Dreams are infrequent, interrupted by the immediate awareness of cold, hunger, and responsibility. Rest becomes functional rather than restorative, a pause between necessary tasks rather than a refuge. As the blizzard weeks stretch on, the landscape outside reinforces the villagers' dependence on careful planning. Frozen streams make water collection arduous. Snowdrifts block roads and isolate homes. Predators, pushed closer by snow, threaten livestock. Any misstep, venturing too far, underestimating snow depth, or failing to conserve energy, can carry consequences beyond the individual. Even as the days lengthen, slightly approaching the turn of winter, uncertainty persists. How long will snow cover last? Will the stores suffice until the thaw? Will an unexpected storm destroy what remained of fodder or harvest remnants? These questions are unanswerable, yet they shape every action and decision. In the stillness of a long cold evening, you sense a central truth: survival in a medieval winter is measured less by abundance and more by careful observation, endurance, and adaptation. Every choice, no matter how small, carries weight. Every act of vigilance maintains the fragile line between sufficiency and disaster. And yet, one question continues to press itself forward: when the cold lasts longer than the stores, when frost threatens both life and livelihood, how did medieval farmers decide what sacrifices to make, and how did these choices ripple through their households and communities? As winter reaches its harshest peak, survival for medieval farmers becomes a test not of strength alone, but of judgment, endurance, and communal cooperation. The weeks of frost and snow are no longer abstract challenges. They are immediate, pressing realities that shape every moment of daily life. Decisions about fire, food, and labor are critical, and even small errors can carry devastating consequences. Inside homes, The hearth assumes a central role not just for warmth, but as a symbol of continuity and life. Fires burn day and night, tended meticulously. Families work in shifts to maintain them, understanding that if embers die, the entire household risks hypothermia or suffocation from damp cold. Every log split, every ember banked, and every adjustment of straw or blankets is a calculated act aimed at extending survival through relentless winter nights. Food management becomes a disciplined exercise. Grain and preserved legumes are rationed with precision. Bread is sliced thinly, pottage diluted with water or boiled roots, and any remaining meat is consumed sparingly, sometimes buried beneath snow or straw to preserve it. Salt, the most precious of commodities, is reserved for critical preservation. Families develop a deep understanding of caloric expenditure, ensuring that every meal fuels the body enough to perform essential labor without exhausting limited supplies. Livestock care dominates remaining energy. Hay and fodder, already rationed, must stretch for weeks longer than planned. Farmers observe animals closely, noting signs of weakness or frostbite. Decisions must be made about which animals are fed first, which are left to conserve limited resources, and sometimes which must be slaughtered to prevent starvation or disease. Each choice reverberates beyond immediate necessity, influencing the family's survival and their ability to trade or rebuild in spring. Illness becomes an ever-present threat. Respiratory infections, frostbite, exhaustion, and malnutrition test the resilience of both adults and children. Families improvise treatments, tend the sick, and adjust sleeping arrangements to provide warmth without compromising the health of others. Crowded sleeping conditions and fragmented rest increase the likelihood of further illness, yet vigilance persists because the alternative is far grimmer. Social networks, neighbors, extended kin, and village alliances play a vital role. Those with surplus resources may provide small aid to families in greater need, sharing grain, firewood, or labor. Trust is fragile and measured. Cooperation is essential but calibrated. Overextending aid risks one's own household, while refusal may lead to isolation or resentment. Medieval records indicate that the success of a village in surviving winter often depended on such delicate balances of generosity and self-preservation. Children and young adults carry crucial responsibilities. They haul water, feed animals, collect firewood, and assist with rationing. Their observation and memory of weather patterns, snow depths, and resource locations are indispensable to household decision-making. The winter teaches them lessons of endurance, practical knowledge, and caution, forming the foundation of survival skills that will carry into adulthood. As winter begins its slow retreat, even minor relief presents challenges. Snow melts gradually. Fields remain frozen or waterlogged. Livestock require careful reintroduction to pastures. Food stores are depleted, leaving households dependent on the first signs of spring growth. Yet the knowledge gained during these months, strategies for rationing, cooperation, and careful observation of weather and environment remains invaluable, shaping how families prepare for future winters. Medieval farmers' winter strategies leave a profound imprint on the social and cultural fabric of villages. Lessons learned through hardship influence family routines, communal expectations, and oral traditions. They inform decisions about sowing, storage, labor allocation, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. Survival is not merely a physical challenge, but a moral and practical exercise in resilience, cooperation, and foresight. And as the frost begins to retreat, leaving the soil cold but alive, one thought persists in a world where survival depends on constant vigilance, careful rationing, and the endurance of both humans and animals. How many lives were saved or lost, not by the force of nature itself, but by the wisdom, or miscalculation, of those who lived among the ice? You enter this story as dusk falls, when the sun disappears behind distant hills and darkness descends over a medieval village. In the winter months, night is long and merciless. It is a time when the cold is most exacting, when fatigue and frost converge, and when the ordinary rhythms of work and sustenance give way to the raw necessity of warmth, shelter, and rest. Survival is measured in small increments. The ability to maintain a fire, the capacity to retain heat, and the endurance of both body and mind. Houses of the poor are simple, often a single room constructed of wattle and daub, timber or stone, if the village is fortunate. Roofs may be thatched or reinforced with boards. Windows are small, usually covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Doors are heavy, drafty, and imperfect seals against the winter wind. Each home is multifunctional: kitchen, sleeping quarters, workspace, and sometimes animal stall share the same space. There is no separation between labor and rest, no private sanctuary to escape the cold. The hearth is the heartbeat of every home. Fires are tended constantly, banked carefully during the night, to maintain embers while conserving fuel. Families sleep in proximity to the hearth, layering themselves under rough wool or linen blankets. Animals, goats, pigs, chickens, share the space when possible, not for companionship, but for warmth. Body heat is currency in these months. Every movement, every adjustment in bedding, every shared corner of the floor is calculated to conserve it. Clothing is worn continuously, even to bed. Tunics, hose, cloaks, and sometimes shoes remain on at night. Removing them wastes heat and exposes the body to frostbite. Wool is the preferred fabric. Linen is thin and often insufficient. Layers are pressed close to the body. Old or patched clothing is valued highly for its insulation, and garments are repaired with care, even while the hands are stiff from cold. Children, though smaller and more vulnerable, adapt quickly. They learn instinctively where to position themselves for warmth, how to share space without disturbing others, and when to rise briefly to tend fire or check on animals. Adolescents assume responsibilities that exceed modern expectations. They manage portions of firewood, water, and food, understanding that failure could threaten the household. The night is a training ground in endurance, observation, and prudence. Sleep itself is fragmented. Frost, hunger, and noise interrupt rest. Households often practice segmented sleep, short intervals of deep rest, punctuated by periods of wakefulness for chores or vigilance. Dreams are rare and fleeting. Consciousness alternates between exhaustion and necessity. Even at rest, bodies remain alert to subtle signs. A draft entering, the collapse of a thatched roof under snow, or the low moan of livestock in distress. Illness is a constant threat. Respiratory infections, fever, and frostbite strike quickly in these conditions, exacerbated by close quarters and shared air. The sick are positioned closer to the hearth and wrapped in extra layers, but care is exhausting. Adults sacrifice their own warmth and sleep to maintain the fragile equilibrium of survival. Death, when it occurs, is quiet, often unrecorded, except in oral memory or parish records. Noise is muted. Snow absorbs sound, leaving only the hum of the fire, the breathing of sleepers, and the occasional cluck of a chicken or lowing of a cow. This silence amplifies awareness. Each sound is noted and interpreted. A draft, a creaking timber, or footsteps outside may signal danger or intrusion. Vigilance is not optional. It is a continuous, unconscious act. Religion and superstition influence nightly routines. Prayers, blessings, and rituals are performed to protect households from frost, illness, or misfortune. Candles are lit sparingly, not only for illumination, but as part of spiritual and practical precaution. Sacred objects may be placed near the hearth or bedding to invite protection. These acts reflect both faith and the attempt to exert control over the uncontrollable. Even in the harshest conditions, the human mind seeks patterns, routines, and small comforts. Families tell stories, recount local history, or sing quietly to soothe children. Such acts preserve morale and reinforce social cohesion. Humor, observation, and shared memory become subtle but vital tools for survival, preserving mental resilience when physical comfort is minimal. And yet, as the long night stretches on, one question remains unresolved. When warmth is scarce, sleep fragmented, and bodies pressed together against the cold, how did medieval villagers balance the demands of survival with the instinctive human need for rest? And what strategies emerged when night itself became an adversary rather than a respite? As the night deepens, the strategies for surviving winter become both more subtle and more demanding. The first hours of darkness pass with routine vigilance. Fires are maintained, animals checked, and family members arranged to share warmth efficiently. But as the long hours wear on, fatigue sets in, testing both endurance and decision-making. Every movement, every choice of position or activity, carries consequences for health, comfort, and survival. Families organize sleeping spaces meticulously. Those closest to the hearth, typically elders, infants, or the sick, receive priority placement. Others are positioned in concentric layers, their bodies forming natural insulation for the warmth of the center. Pallets of straw or leaves are rearranged repeatedly to maximize insulation. Bedding is layered carefully. Old cloaks, extra tunics, and even sacks of grain become blankets when nothing else is available. Each adjustment is calculated, Too little covering invites frostbite, too much restricts movement and circulation. Animals are integrated into this system of shared warmth. Goats tucked in corners, pigs resting on straw, or chickens roosting overhead, contribute body heat, raising ambient temperature by degrees that can mean the difference between life and death. Yet their presence carries risk, disease can spread quickly, and the noises and movement of animals may disturb sleep, forcing families to weigh comfort against survival advantages. Fire maintenance dominates attention. Logs are split and fed slowly to prolong burn time. Embers are banked carefully, and smoke is managed to prevent suffocation. Even small miscalculations can reduce the efficacy of the hearth. Too few embers and warmth diminishes. Too much fuel and smoke may make the space unbreathable. Households develop precise schedules, often rotating tasks so that someone is awake at all times to manage the fire, water, and the needs of animals and family alike. Food, although rationed during the day, remains a critical concern at night. Even small portions of bread or pottage provide both nutrition and the mental comfort necessary to endure cold hours. Families measure carefully, ensuring that no one consumes more than their share, and older children assist in distributing portions. Hunger is persistent, a dull ache that accompanies every task and interrupts the most fragile moments of rest. Sleep patterns are highly segmented. Most villagers do not experience continuous rest. Instead, they fall into cycles of brief slumber, punctuated by wakefulness for chores, tending fires, or monitoring others. This segmented sleep, though exhausting, is adaptive. It allows households to respond rapidly to threats such as dropping temperatures, illness, or sudden structural failures in poorly insulated homes. Over time, bodies acclimate, developing a resilience that balances alertness with intermittent rest. Illness continues to loom. Frostbite, pneumonia, and simple exhaustion can incapacitate or kill quickly under these conditions. Families develop strategies to monitor symptoms while conserving warmth. The sick are kept close to the hearth and surrounded with extra layers, while caregivers sacrifice comfort to ensure survival. These practices are pragmatic and often unrecorded in chronicles, yet they define the experience of medieval winter nights. Community vigilance extends beyond individual households. Neighbors check on one another, coordinate firewood collection, and share tasks such as clearing snow or tending communal livestock. Cooperation is vital, but it is balanced against scarcity. No family can afford to overextend themselves without risking their own survival. Social bonds are tested, strengthened, and sometimes strained by the prolonged night and the relentless cold. Children, though small and vulnerable, are essential to these strategies. They navigate the cramped spaces with care, learn to manage small responsibilities, and adapt to the fragmented sleep patterns of adults. Their education is not formal but entirely practical, understanding heat flow, rationing food, and observing patterns of behavior that preserve life in harsh conditions. In this environment, childhood lessons are lessons in endurance, observation, and vigilance. Even within the home, the night carries uncertainty. Cracks in walls allow drafts to creep in. Smoke from the hearth can become oppressive. Snow and ice outside threaten the structural integrity of roofs. Vigilance is continuous, and attention to detail is critical. Families learn to anticipate small failures, slipping embers, sagging beams, or frozen water barrels, and act before minor problems escalate into deadly ones. As the hours wear on, the psychological impact of long nights becomes apparent. Silence amplifies fears. The monotony and stillness of snow outside create a heightened awareness of every sound and movement. Families rely on small rituals, storytelling, and quiet conversation to maintain morale. These acts, while subtle, help prevent despair and preserve the mental resilience necessary for survival until dawn. And yet, amid these routines and adaptations, one question persists: when fatigue becomes overwhelming, when fire embers wane, and when the long night seems unending, what limits exist to human endurance, and how did medieval villagers reconcile the need for rest with the relentless demands of survival in a frozen, darkened world? As the night stretches into its deepest hours, medieval households face the culmination of all their winter strategies, a delicate balance of warmth, vigilance, and endurance. Fires burn low but must not die, food supplies are carefully measured, and every movement is dictated by the twin demands of conserving heat and preserving strength. Survival depends not merely on preparation, but on constant adaptation and observation. The hearth dominates life, both physically and symbolically. It is the source of heat, light, and indirectly, hope. Embers are banked to conserve warmth, logs are fed carefully to prolong burn time, and smoke is monitored to prevent suffocation. Family members take turns attending the fire, ensuring that someone remains alert while others rest. Even brief lapses can allow cold to penetrate the home, sap energy, and endanger the weakest household members. Sleeping arrangements are orchestrated with precision. Elders, children, and the sick are positioned closest to the fire, wrapped in multiple layers of wool, linen, or whatever blankets are available. Adults form protective layers around them, sacrificing personal comfort to maintain collective warmth. Animals, when present indoors, are tucked strategically into corners to share body heat without spreading disease. This system of shared warmth is a silent negotiation, a blend of instinct and learned strategy. Food remains rationed meticulously. Bread, pottage, and preserved meat are divided into minimal portions. Salt, vital for preserving the last cuts of meat or fish, is used sparingly. Every calorie is calculated to maintain enough energy for necessary labor, feeding animals, stoking fires, fetching water, while avoiding waste. The long night amplifies awareness of scarcity. Hunger is constant, but careful management prevents it from becoming fatal. Illness is a shadow that moves through the household. Frostbite, respiratory infections, and exhaustion threaten at every turn. Caregivers sacrifice warmth and sleep to tend to the sick, while the afflicted endure layered clothing and close proximity to the fire to maintain body heat. Survival is a collaborative effort. Individual weakness cannot exist in isolation, for the household functions as an interconnected system. Children continue to play vital, if constrained, roles. They navigate icy floors and crowded spaces with care, deliver small supplies, and assist in tasks that ensure survival. Their rapid adaptation is striking. They internalize lessons in endurance, observation, and rationing, forming habits and instincts that will serve them for life. Through necessity, childhood is transformed into training for survival. The psychological toll of the night is profound. Silence, monotony, and the unrelenting cold heighten anxiety. Snow outside absorbs sound, making the world feel distant yet oppressive. Families rely on storytelling, quiet songs, prayers, and subtle rituals to maintain morale. Even small acts like arranging bedding differently or adding another log to the fire become sources of reassurance and agency against the overwhelming forces of winter. By the early hours before dawn, the home has become a microcosm of resilience. Every ember, every carefully rationed meal, every adjustment of bedding or clothing reflects lessons honed over generations: observation, patience, vigilance, and cooperation. The household survives not by force, but through the accumulation of small, deliberate acts. And yet, as the first light of morning illuminates frost-lined windows and snow-laden rooftops, one lingering question remains: when every precaution has been taken, when bodies have been pressed together for warmth, and when night itself has been endured repeatedly over long winters, what limits exist to human resilience, and how much of survival depends on luck rather than strategy?